Hi, I'm Sriram and I'm doing my postgraduate program in business management at IIM Trichy. As part of my coursework, I'm going to share my research on shaping up India as a manufacturing superpower, promoting growth and job creation through manufacturing. Before we move on, I would like to touch upon India's current economic situation. India has achieved a long-term growth of 6.8% per year. However, since 2008 global financial crisis, India's growth trajectory has slowed and structural weakness have become apparent. India's main demand engines, domestic private investment and global demand, have stalled. On the investment side, bank credit to industry slowed, and the proportion of non-performing assets to total assets tripled to more than 9% in the period from fiscal year 2012 to 2019, driven by loans to corporate sectors predominantly before 2010. Due to mounting credit risk aversion, the cost of capital remained high despite falling inflation, and this held back investment. And from a demand perspective, the trade intensity of global GDP declined, and India was unable to take advantage of shifts in the global value chain. As a result, our exports declined as a share of India's GDP from 25 to 19% between 2013 and 2019. So, our path to economic growth revolves around these five ideas. India needs rapid GDP growth to create at least 90 million non-farm jobs by 2030. Manufacturing has $455 billion potential economic value in financial year 2030. To capture these frontier opportunities, India needs to triple its number of large firms, and there also have to be a targeted reforms which can raise productivity and competitiveness, and also supported by financial sector reforms, which could enable companies in India to meet its capital requirements. In order to leapfrog, India needs to create at least 90 million new non-farm jobs to absorb the 60 million new workers who will enter the workforce based on current demographics, and 30 million who could move from farm work to more productive non-farm sector. For this magnitude of employment growth to be gainful and productive, India's GDP will need to grow by 8 to 8.5% annually over the next decade. To generate the productivity and jobs needed, a manufacturing and construction sector will need to grow the most. In order to become a globally competitive manufacturing hub, India should explore its high potential sectors, which contribute to about 56% of global trade. India's share of export in these sectors is 1.5% of the global total, while its share of imports is 2.3%. But these sectors has a potential to generate $400 billion in exports by 2030, up from $140 billion in 2018, by raising its competitiveness in these sectors through government-led reforms in land, labor, and power, as well as through firm-led productivity enhancement measures. India could generate a $455 billion in economic value by 2030. The benefits include greater efficiency. For example, about 60% of manufacturing sector output could leverage smart safety management, predictive maintenance, and product design related improvements. These in turn can lift productivity in plants and factories by 7 to 11%. Across sectors, India could generate $275 billion in economic value by 2030 while supporting 16 million new jobs. Many workers in these roles will need retraining, and some may be displaced and needing redeployment. India should also improve its focus to increase number of large firms. In India, large companies have been a significant drivers of growth and innovation over the past 3 decades. Although the contribution to GDP has declined since 2012, they account for almost 40% of total exports and employ 20% of the direct formal workforce. Large firms in India face two major challenges. First, India has fewer large firms relative to GDP, and those firms make a smaller revenue contribution to GDP compared to our peers. Second, the productivity and profitability performance of large companies in India have scope to improve their efficiency compared to other emerging economies. Overall, the productivity levels are on average one tenth to one quarter to those of peers in other outperformer economies across sectors. The profitability of India's large firms measured as return on assets has been falling since 2012 from 1.9 to 1.2%. To capture promising frontiers opportunities, some mid-size and small firms will need to become large and small firms need to become mid-size. India as a whole, we need to triple our number of large firms by 2030 in order to achieve a state of manufacturing superpower. And some of the reforms which could improve manufacturing includes a stable and declining tariff regime, which support in removal of inverted duty structures. For example, high-tech firms and others can import certain items at custom duties of 10% or less, whereas raw materials including steel tubes, pipes, and carbon steel all carry a 15% custom duty. And also building a well-functioning port proximate manufacturing clusters with free trade warehousing zones and faster approval process and more flexible labor laws can improve our cross-border trade and also open more opportunities in the global trade horizon. And there can also be select sets of incentives which are targeted, time bound, and conditional, and reduce the cost disadvantage which India faces in comparison with other outperforming economies. For example, handset production is between 10 and 20% more expensive in India than in Vietnam or China, which have benefited from cheaper components due to a strong manufacturing ecosystem and better infrastructure. So these incentives potentially include tax concessions as well as incentives for capital investment and innovation could be granted based on achievement of certain output and investment linked targets to help close the gap. And last but not the least, the financial reform could also be a major support in terms of leading this growth or driving growth in India. The average financing cost commercial borrowers in India is structurally higher by an estimated 5.2 percentage points than in comparable economies. Uh, uh, the success of India would depend on majorly these two factors. One is to channelize more household savings to capital markets and reducing cost of credit intermediation. Uh, More than the sum of capital which is required, India needs to put its focus to improve the overall depth of financial market as measured by outstanding equity, corporate bonds, and government bonds, and cumulative 5-year issuance of securitized products, which is about 140% of GDP compared to an average of about 240% among peers. And equity and debt instruments both lag. Mutual fund assets under management are equivalent to 12% of GDP, less than half the level of peer economies at 26%. So the government borrowing programs that relies heavily on bank deposits reduces the source of capital available to private corporate sector and consequently increases the cost of capital for commercial borrowers. So the success of India would be to channelize more household savings to capital market, thereby easing the financial situation for the commercial businesses to borrow. Uh, by these five aspects, I believe India can become of a manufacturing superstar. Thank you. Thanks for listening.